Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. It's always hard to follow somebody like that, right? But fortunately, we have a couple of amazing speakers coming up. But as was mentioned, I'm President and CEO of First Nations Bank of Canada. I'm also a member of the Gitxsan Nation and a member of the House of Luce, and looking forward to hearing one of my relatives from the Gitxsan speak later, I think later today as well. If you're not familiar with First Nations Bank, we are the only Schedule I Indigenous-owned bank in Canada, and we provide the full array of banking services. We are Indigenous-owned and operated, and we do some of the most innovative financings for First Nations and Inuit communities in the country. I have the great fortune today to introduce two very accomplished men. Today we'll hear from Brian Moynihan, who's the CEO of Bank of America via video. Brian is a visionary leader at the helm of Bank of America. With a team of over 210,000 employees, Bank of America is one of the largest banks in the world. Brian is committed to improving financial lives across the United States and globally. Brian has transformed the bank during his 14 years as CEO, turning it into one of the most respected banks globally. His tireless efforts to promote diversity and inclusion have made it one of the most desirable banks for people of color to work at, and it's been named the USA's most just company. Beyond banking, Brian actively participates in organizations shaping economic and market trends, and he champions sustainability as the chair of the Sustainable Markets Initiative, which was founded by His Majesty King Charles III. Now, some of you know, I spent about 20 years working on and off Wall Street. I left Merrill Lynch in 2008, the same year that it was acquired by Bank of America. I'm not saying my leaving Merrill caused it to need to be rescued, but the timing's a little suspicious. So I also have the honor of introducing Chief Perry Bellegarde, a dedicated champion of First Nations rights and well-being. With over 35 years of leadership experience, Chief Bellegarde has made too many significant contributions to the Indigenous community for me to list them all, but let's talk about a few of them. Leadership roles, some of those include him beginning his political career as a tribal council representative for the Touchwood-File Hills Qu'Appelle Tribal Council. In 1998, Chief Bellegarde became the chief of the Federation of the Saskatchewan Indian Nations, and so he represented the interests of First Nations across Saskatchewan. From 2014 to 2021, Chief Bellegarde served as the national chief of the AFN. His tireless efforts aim to close the gap in the quality of life between First Nations and other Canadian families. Under his leadership, public awareness of First Nations concerns and priorities increased significantly. And last but not least, Chief Bellegarde helped found the First Nations Bank of Canada. And just this month, he came full circle, becoming the chair of the board for the First Nations Bank of Canada. Yes, thank you. His accomplishments are many, but they include the passage of Canada's first national legislation recognizing and protecting Indigenous languages. He brought much-needed changes in how government services and First Nations communities are funded. He pushed to secure a legal commitment to a national implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And he influenced the acknowledgement of the Indigenous rights in the final Canada-US-Mexico agreement. He has received many honors and awards, including the Confederation Medal, the Saskatchewan Centennial Medal, the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, Golden Jubilee Medal, and Platinum Jubilee Medal. You'll notice he has a real connection to the crown. I didn't see him in that show, though. I didn't see him in that movie. The Saskatchewan Order of Merit. He has an honorary doctorate, both from Doctorate of Laws, that is, from both Queen's University and Lakehead University. He is the honorary president of the Royal Canadian Geographic Society, and he was named Nation Builder of the Year in 2021 by the Empire Club of Canada. Chief Perry Bellegarde's legacy is one of advocacy, transformation, and dedication. He is a giant in Indigenous rights and a tremendous facilitator of Indigenous business. Please join me in welcoming Bank of America's CEO, Brian Moynihan, and First Nations Bank of Canada Board Chairman and Special Advisor at Fasken Law Firm, Chief Perry Bellegarde. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this important event. This event is focused on topics that are critical to our shared future. As chair of the Sustainable Markets Initiative, I believe that the private sector must be at the forefront of leading the change to just energy transition. This includes strong and effective corporate Indigenous partnerships, and those partnerships ensure that Indigenous governance, values, rights, and knowledge systems are reflected in the projects, the policy, and the consent to those projects. And what does this do? It helps us build more responsible, inclusive futures for all of us. Now, as chair and CEO of Bank of America, I lead a team helping our clients to plan and achieve their sustainability goals. We do this every day all around the world. And of course, this includes my teammates here in Canada, who are led by our country executive, Adam Howard. We are proud that this work includes ongoing engagement in this space with our clients and our First Nations partners. I've had the honor to chair the SMI since it was founded by His Majesty King Charles III in his former role as a Prince of Wales in 2020. The SMI's mission is to be the world's go-to private sector organization for a transition to a sustainable future. And the SMI is already making an impact. Hundreds of industry and government organizations have come together to meet the aims of the Terra Carta through the SMI. The SMI has formed 22 task forces and other alliances to accelerate a sustainable transition, and more will come in the future. At the same time, our country councils bring together government and industry to help find opportunities to advance and accelerate sustainability goals. These groups also help to amplify opportunities and barriers faced at the regional and country level with world leaders at important international forums. One of the things that is well known is no United Nations for the private sector, and that makes organizations like the SMI much more critical to the world's future. The SMI serves as a forum for global governments and multilateral institutions to seek private sector advice. We also provide the private sector, the CEOs of these companies, representing nearly every sector of the economy, a chance to collaborate on a global economy and sustainable transition. In this way, we have created what King Charles calls a coalition of the willing. Our SMI CEOs embrace their role as catalysts. They're driving a seismic shift towards a sustainable future. And that future puts nature, people, and planet at the heart of that value creation. The SMI and the FNMPC share many of the same goals. We both want to accelerate the sustainable transition. We both want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We both want to foster innovation, and we both want to accelerate progress toward an ambitious and sustainable future. And we understand that Indigenous economic inclusion and values are key to accomplishing this. Indigenous, culture-defined values deeply align with our own at the SMI around nature, people, and planet. So I encourage all of you to find out more about the SMI, the Sustainable Markets Initiative, through our website. But more importantly, reach out to our teammates who are in the audience today. One of the key teammates, is our leader, Jennifer Jordan Safey, who is our CEO, and she's here today. Another colleague is Perry Bellegarde, our Indigenous advisor to the SMI. He invited me to join you here today. So, in closing, I wish you a successful 2 days here in Toronto. And many thanks to Mark, and many thanks to the First Nations Major Projects Coalition team for putting this great event together. I look forward to working together with all of you in the future.
Well, thanks to Brian for those words. Nistamina kakiano temptik nuako magnak ninashkamun. Nista piksquid nihon absisi kanaskum tinwao. My friends, my relatives, happy to be with you all. To the Anishinaabe, Bek, the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Mississaugas, Kanaskum Tinwao, Indigenous relatives and friends. I also want to take some time to acknowledge and thank the First Nations Major Projects Coalition team for putting on this conference and gathering for all of us here. And to Chief Charlene Gale, the chair of the board, to Nilo Edwards, I won't call him Nilo, but Nilo, the CEO, and of course Mark Podlasley, for their strong dedication and commitment for hosting another great conference for all of us. I also want to give a shout out to Jolene Foster, another person that's co-chairing or co-facilitating or co-leading as well. She's managing partner at Deloitte. Very important. So again this morning, thanking Brian for his leadership and his words and his commitment and dedication to promote the Sustainable Markets Initiative, to enhance the SMI, to make it work for all of us globally. He's the CEO of Bank of America, but he's taken the time and energy and effort to work towards being the chair of the board for the Sustainable Markets Initiative. So I want to thank him and acknowledge him for his leadership. As an advisor there, I can talk about why did I get involved? What's its goal? What's its mission? And going back, you can look at it and just say the vision of the SMI, the Sustainable Markets Initiative, is to accelerate transition to a sustainable future. And that's for everybody across this beautiful world. A sustainable future for all of us. And King Charles used his convening powers to bring together global CEOs. Because he recognized years ago that we are at a transition as human beings, as the two-leggeds. He recognized that we need to come together and start focusing our energy and efforts on decarbonization, lowering greenhouse gas emissions, and knowing full well that the government sector alone cannot deal with this issue. You need all three sectors working collaboratively together. The public sector, which are the governments, and the private sector, the CEOs from the private industries across the world, and even the philanthropic sector. If we're going to have impact on this issue that faces all of us, and it's climate change, climate degradation. The king would say, Mother Earth can only sustain us for so long. His view, his way of looking at things, trying to get these CEOs to put the planet first, put nature first in their business planning operations is key and fundamental. We said before that the Terra Carta is there. And I joked one time in a meeting, I'd swear that His Majesty was a First Nation citizen before because he has our worldview. And he's been talking about this for many, many years. When we look at our worldview as human beings, as two-leggeds, we say we're all connected. We're all part of that environment. And it's necessary to get First Nations people, Indigenous peoples, at all decision-making tables. Not only in governments as deputy ministers in the public sector, but even in the private sector as CEOs on the boards of directors. Planning strategies, planning different ways of doing things so that we all have less impact on the things that sustain us most, and that's the land and water. As Brian mentioned, within the SMI, there are 22 task forces, 22 task teams, and they're in different sectors from finance to legal to insurance to agribusiness to sustainable aviation fuels, because even one sector can't deal with this issue alone. So there's 22. And the young lady leading this up, and Brian mentioned, is Jennifer Jordan-Safey. She's here. She's in front. Jennifer, just get up and give a... This is Jennifer Jordan-Safey. She's our CEO for the SMI. And we've said constantly that if these global CEOs, there's over 200 of them, can come together in a good way, in putting the smartest and their brightest people and their energy and efforts together, that we can have an impact globally in a meaningful way. And if they're doing that together, working together, that's a very powerful thing. We now see even the investments, we call it the Natural Capital Investment Alliance within the SMI. And it's mobilizing private capital monies, if you will, for investments that protect and restore nature and biodiversity. Some of you that work in this space will talk about these things like net zero by 2050, the target, the goal that's been set. 30 by 30 by 2030, protecting the biodiversity, restoring things that have been degraded, 30%. Or even keeping the drive for 1.5 degrees alive. Some of you will not, oh, I remember, I hear that. Whether it's from the Paris Accord or from the Biodiversity Conference in Montreal. Keeping the Earth's global temperature not to rise above 1.5. All of those things are talked about through the SMI and the task teams. I want to mention as well that after 7 years as the Assembly of First Nations National Chief, I didn't seek re-election in 2021. But one of the things I focused on that's very important and fundamental to our peoples and to our rights was the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That was adopted in 2007 by the United Nations. There's 144 countries that voted yes in favor of it, 11 abstentions, 4 opposed. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the USA were opposed to in 2007. But through many years of advocacy and pushing the right buttons globally, these nation states changed their minds. And so for Canada, they endorsed it in 2010, but more enthusiastically in 2016. So they've adopted the declaration without qualification. And that's important, not only for Indigenous peoples in Canada, but Indigenous peoples throughout the world. It recognized our right to self-determination. Our own languages, our own lands, our own laws, our own people, and our own identifiable forms of government. And that right is so important when it comes to looking at the balance between the environment and the economy. Seeking to always balance, to find that sweet spot between the environment and the economy. That right to self-determination, very important. And in Canada, we heard this saying, oh, there's duty to consult and accommodate now, when big projects are coming into our territories. And now within the declaration, there's these lines called free, prior, and informed consent. Powerful statements. So it's not just within the United Nations Declaration. Now, as a nation state, Canada, as far as I know, is the only country in the world that has put in place domestic legislation to implement that declaration here within Canada. And that's very powerful. Because what use is this declaration globally if you don't have domestic law to really enact it, to give it teeth, to give it force? And we say we put a little golden arrow within that declaration, or that piece of law in Canada. That little golden arrow we put in there is in preambular paragraph number 9. The doctrine of terra nullius, the doctrine of discovery, are illegal racist doctrines. So that's there now. That's important for us as Indigenous peoples. And we, yeah, give a shout out. That's important because that land is so precious to our peoples. And now that it's there, it achieved royal assent in June 21st of 2020. We use that free, prior, and informed consent clause as a way and as a tool to bring governments and industry to our tables. So to all the CEOs and the chairmen of the board in the room, through different sectors, whether it be forestry, mining, to whatever it is, we've always had this message. Before you try to build anything, build a respectful relationship with the Indigenous peoples first. Involvement and inclusion. And yeah, go beyond diversity, equity, inclusion dialogues. Go beyond corporate social responsibilities. Go beyond the ESG dialogues that have to be in place now. And yes, impact benefit agreements are important. But now equity ownership, equity inclusion are there now. Powerful tools. We know and we heard from Premier Ford about the importance of access to rare earth minerals and all the other minerals that are in Mother Earth. And these last few comments I have, like it's a good message on Earth Day. It's Earth Day today. important again to recognize these things that I'm going to say. Because all my life I've been about rights, inherent rights, Aboriginal rights, treaty rights. All of these things are important. But why did we fight so hard for our rights? Why did we always put pressure and put things in place for these rights to be recognized? And it's simple. So we can freely exercise our right to self-determination. Freely use that right when we want to uphold our responsibilities. We have rights, but we have responsibilities. And as Indigenous peoples, as First Nations people, that's a very big responsibility. And we're going to have greater opportunities now because of things like the $5 billion loan guarantee, because of greater access to capital. So we now have greater responsibilities as Indigenous peoples, and even as two-leggeds, as human beings, to make good decisions, right decisions. Just like our elders have done it, just like King Charles has done it. At his coronation, I can remember when he said, he comes to serve and not to be served. He comes to serve and not to be served. And I was asked, what kind of king is he going to be? And I said, he's going to be a king that, like our elders, puts on his 7-generation thinking hat, or in his case, the crown hat. The crown. 7 generations down the road. That's the kind of king he's going to be. And the Sustainable Market Initiative is that an example of that 7-generation thinking. The Terra Carta and the Ashtra Carta are part of that. So my last points, my friends and relatives, on these responsibilities as human beings. Very important, these responsibilities. And our worldview, and I'll close with this, our worldview as two-leggeds, as human beings, every day, thanks to Creator God for another day of life. But we take time to acknowledge and give thanks to our Mother Earth, Father Sky, Grandmother Moon, Grandfather Sun, our relatives, the Star People. Then we take time to acknowledge the ones that sit in the east, the south, the west, the north. Then taking time to acknowledge the four-leggeds, our relatives, the four-legged ones. The ones that fly, the ones that swim, the ones that crawl. Take time to acknowledge the male plants and the female plants. And really take time to acknowledge and give thanks for those 4 grandmother spirits that look after the waters. The rainwater, fresh water, salt water, and when life comes in women, water breaks. 4 grandmother spirits. And then we'll acknowledge us as the two-leggeds. We're human beings. And so us as two-leggeds have great responsibility to fit into that global family, if you will, so that we can have a hope for the future. Our children and grandchildren can have a hope for the future, and those yet unborn. So my friends, my relatives, that's what the SMI is about. That's what the Sustainable Markets Initiative is about. That's what the UN Declaration is about. That's what we as a collective family of two-leggeds is about. So let's plan that chart, that path forward in a good way. That's what I have to say this morning. Ekuse. Mas continuar.